Okay, take 23. Okay, welcome back to part 2. I finally got my mic working again. And, okay, so I just skipped ahead a tiny bit because they started talking about, we need batteries and, storage options for the energy, which is what I was talking about at the end of the last part. Before I saw them talk about it. So they were talking about batteries a little bit, but they were mostly saying batteries are bad and we don't want to use them. So let's see what else they have to say about that.
Turning them on, turning it off, there's energy used and lost at any time. Kind of like when you turn your car on off, you use a little extra gas to get it turned on. I do still think you have to maintain a base load of some kinds.
What's the solution then?
You need energy storage. Without storage, you can't count on it.
If you can store the energy that's created off those things...
I kind of thought we had that down, but I guess not for everything.
And now you're reducing your need for a base load.
How do electric cars work again?
Yeah, absolutely.
In a big way, actually. And as more energy storage gets on the grid, it has a mass scale implication.
When I looked up how much battery storage there is, it was less than 0.1% of what's needed. In a couple of years, they begin to degrade and need to be replaced a few years later. I learned that the solar panels don't last forever either.
Some solar panels are built to last only 10 years, so that it's not as if you get this just magic free energy, right? I don't know that it's the solution, and here I am helping to sell materials that would go into photovoltaics.
And so to overcome profound limitations of solar and wind, rarely discussed in the media, a new generation of technology was rising in the California desert.
What is this? What we're using is a field of mirrors to focus sunlight onto a tower. The power plant itself, at 377 megawatts, will be the largest of its kind in the world.
This will become the biggest solar plant in the world. There's some people that look out in the desert and they see miles and miles of emptiness. I see miles and miles of a gold mine.
But this next generation had a fossil fuel secret too.
This solar facility burns natural gas pretty much every morning in order to get started up.
How long do they have to burn it for?
Hours usually. This is the incoming natural gas for the facility. This plant would work about as well without natural gas as I would without coffee in the morning.
Or maybe how you would be without food.
Without food, yeah. They have to file for acid rain permits for nitrous oxide emissions. They have to apply for carbon offset permits because they're producing carbon dioxide here, so they have to offset that. The whole thing is built using fossil fuel infrastructure, from the concrete to the steel to the mirrors to the backing on the mirrors. The sun is renewable.
My point exactly. Doesn't appear out of thin air.
So, glass is renewable.
Glass is not renewable.
Iron's renewable. Aluminum, that's renewable. I recycle my pop soda cans. I know it's renewable.
Yeah, the problem with all of these materials is that it takes an incredible amount of energy to mine and process all of the materials that go into building something like this. You use more fossil fuels to do this than you're getting benefit from it. You would have been better off just burning the fossil fuels in the first place instead of playing pretend.
That green energy has nothing to do with fossil fuels is apparently a story only meant for you and me. Here is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. speaking to oil and gas company insiders.
It's a combination solar gas plant. It's a turbine that we just take from a gas plant, suspended from a big scaffolding, a tower, and surrounded by giant mirrors in the desert. The plants that we're building, the wind plants and the solar plants, are gas plants.
What kind of game is being played?
Well, we're basically just being fed a lie. For instance, you'll hear about Germany running on wind and solar.
35% right now.
50% of their power. There were days this past summer when the Germans were generating 80% of their power from the sun.
But Germany is still Europe's largest consumer of coal.
Aber wenn in dieser Region die meiste Kohle gefördert wird, dann ist ja auch hier der größte CO2-Ausstoß.
Only a small fraction of their energy actually comes from wind and solar. In fact, Germany just built a large terminal to import natural gas from the United States. Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, when he announced his Gigafactory battery plant, he said it would power itself with wind and solar energy.
Through a combination of geothermal, wind, and solar, it will produce all the energy that it needs.
But in fact, it has lines connecting it to the same electrical grid that we're all connected to.
Okay, so my thought a minute ago was when that other guy was saying we're all being fed lies. I've always known that when we're producing the materials needed for this shit, it's being produced using fossil fuels because we don't have reliance on clean energy yet. When we started mining oil and coal and fracking, were they saying, we can't possibly start doing this because we don't have the materials unless we get on a different source of energy? Well, it's okay, recycling. You mentioned aluminum cans, plastic bottles. If we say, why recycle so much energy, collect all that recycling, sort it out, and melt it down, and reuse it. I read articles saying that plastic recycling is pointless because it takes more energy to recycle plastic than it is to create new bottles. So the point is, we need to stop using it. Stop fucking using plastic. Start figure out how to make plastic that has or a material in it that after a certain amount of time so that it actually dissolves, doesn't sit around in the earth for years and years and years, degrading slowly and poisoning the earth. So if scientists can come up with a material, plastic material that eats itself, like biodegradable basically, then why can't we just figure out how to stop using plastic and stop using oil? We don't, there's ways to turn ocean water into drinkable water now. There's ways to create fuel out of water. There's ways to create fuel out of unused corn waste from farms. So we can figure shit out. There's just profit-driven. And if we, stop having to use oil, then there would be no reason to keep drilling for it. So we would, I know for a fact that when you put, maybe they're just talking about giant farms right now, but when you put solar panels on your house, you can automatically start getting your energy from those solar panels in your house and stop using, the energy that you're paying for. Because the people I was talking about in part 1 that have been using solar panels for years and years at this point talk about how they never have to pay another power bill, and they actually end up putting energy into the energy grid from collecting so much energy from the solar panels. And then some of them actually get paid for it. I don't know how exactly, but I've heard several people talk about their solar panels and how they're telling their neighbors to get some, and all their neighbors are getting them, and they're all happy, and have energy at night too because they stored on a battery or a generator or whatever for their house. And if everybody could use solar panels on their roofs, then there wouldn't be a problem. Come on, Jimmy Carter had solar panels on the White House way back when he was president. And that was decades and decades and decades ago. I'm not positive the year, so I don't want to say what year, but it was like in the 60s or something. He put solar panels on the fucking White House way back then because they had it figured out pretty much and could use solar panels. So come on, people. Okay, so maybe we can't create gigantic farms that take us completely off of the fossil fuel or electric grid right now, but we can start transitioning people's homes. We can start transitioning one building at a time and one neighborhood at a time until we figure out how to fix these problems they're talking about. So the fact that they just like to constantly bring these devil's advocates into it is kind of annoying. I was hoping they would encourage people, not discourage people. But let's keep going.
Wind turbines and solar panels use rare earth metals. And in fact, the rare earth mine is right up the street from here. In mining these deep deposits, about 90% of what they pull up out of the ground contains uranium, thorium, and low-level other radionuclides. Radioactive waste that has to be disposed of somehow. They kind of turn it into a paste and spread it over the desert floor.
Well, that's good for the desert, right?
Yeah, the desert loves that. Tesla's electric cars are built with aluminum, which uses 8 times more energy to manufacture than steel. They use lithium, which also rely on toxic mining. And even more graphite, which is one of the rarest forms of carbon. In fact, the investors wanted to open several new graphite mines after Tesla announced the Gigafactory. Apple claims to be 100% renewable.
We never stop thinking.
That's bullshit. I don't believe anything Apple says. Oh, wow, that's hilarious.
They did chop down forests to put up solar panels near their North Carolina plant, but they didn't disconnect from the grid. They can't.
Duke says energy-hungry companies like Apple can never go entirely off the grid.
They're still hooked up to our grid.
Yeah, because they have to have it for emergencies.
Anywhere in the world that's running on 100% solar and wind alone.
It turns out, you don't just need fossil fuels to run a place like Ivanpah. You need the devil himself. Or in this case, themselves.
All of the mirrors that you see there are built by the Koch brothers, Guardian Glass Industry, a company that they control. Koch Carbon creates a lot of the inputs that are used to create the cement and the concrete and the steel. And not only that, they build the plants that builds polysilicon for solar cells. They actually their own solar line called Solar Molex. From every step of the process, the Koch brothers are there.
But they're the evil doers.
Yeah, the funny part is that when you criticize solar plants like this, you're accused of working for the Koch brothers. That's the idiocy in all of this. This absolutely cannot extend civilization's life. This relies on the most toxic and industrial processes that we've ever created.
Okay, so they talk about the problem being that they were talking about spreading the toxic solution in the desert, which is kind of the same as when they do fracking and they have this giant mass of chemical solution. They just kind of pump it into the ocean or into the lakes or whatever. We've always done that, okay? We've been doing that since the beginning of oil drilling, the beginning of plastics, the beginning of making anything. In the factory, they always had the most irresponsible, short-sighted ways of getting rid of the waste. And that's why that's one reason I hate people who advocate for nuclear energy. I mean, I've heard that it's the best way and it's the cleanest way, but like, at the same time, I think they're being a little too ballsy and a little too sure of themselves, thinking that we can run all these nuclear plants without having something happen like Chernobyl. I know that was it wasn't that long ago actually that happened, and back then they thought they knew everything about it. You know, they thought they knew everything about how to run a nuclear plant and how it worked and how they planned for all possible outcomes. But what happens when we don't have all outcomes planned for something that we didn't foresee, and we end up, destroying half the country, like where there's this massive area that you can't even go in now. They had to waste just for an accident, that one power plant. They've had to build multiple times over different structures to cover that area so they could start destroying and tearing down the plant without polluting the air with all the dust. So they had to actually build an entire dome over the whole area just to destroy what was in it and get rid of the waste. I don't even know. They probably just dumped it in the ocean or buried it in the ground or whatever. And, I worry more about something happening like that one time on one side of the country, or even once, over the course of 50 years, because it takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to fix that problem once it happens. and get rid of all the toxic shit, and it's never going to be safe to farm that land or to live on that land again. What are you going to do if something happens in the middle of this country that destroys half the country? Everybody's going to die or have immigrants just because of one accident? I see how that's logical. Like, if something has that drastically tragic of an outcome for one accident that could happen anywhere, we shouldn't even think of that. We need to be on the table. Because you might think you know everything about it until you don't, you know. So, that's, you know, and then there's the whole disposing of all the waste, which is always going to be a problem, no matter what you're doing. If you're factory making something, there's going to be waste somewhere, and we just have to figure out how to dispose of all the waste that doesn't, you know, make it stick around for hundreds of years or make it kill the planet. I mean, we already know that we can use the waste from farms, the corn waste, like all the husks and everything, to make fuel. So why are we even talking about, oh, we can't possibly have electric cars because they plug into the power grid, which is fossil fuels. We can't have oil anymore, oil-powered cars. So why don't we? People have been using, you know, grease, leftover cooking grease that gets thrown away for a while, like 20 years now, in their cars when they know how to convert it or whatever. So it seems like there are solutions if we look at all the waste from all the different industries and things that we produce in this in this world. We look at all the waste that's produced and start thinking about how can we use that waste instead of piling it into the planet. How can we use the waste in a different way to fuel things so we don't have to worry about there being, you know, all this waste that's left over somewhere that we have to get rid of. And we also don't worry about creating fuel. We can use the waste fuel. There's a lot of ways to use fuel. A lot of vegetation, a lot of, you know, wood waste, and just all kinds of crap that we could use making fuel. I don't know why they're so gung-ho about trying to create a new energy source when we use what we have. Like, it seems like that should be the number one solution. Stop using plastic and stop using oil, and start trying to figure out how we can use waste from other things instead, because that solves two problems with one, you know, solution. Okay, we get the point. I didn't and speed this up, by the way. Once we have the parts with that energy.
Technology is that it is so environmentally benign.
If they want to make that point, they could show the destruction of the Amazon. Humans love destroying shit.
I thought deserts could be sacrifice zones. I was wrong. Deserts are not dead. They are in fact full of ancient life.
They used to be, of course.
In the desert, the Joshua tree stands, waiting for the giant ground sloths and the mammoths that shall never return. The Joshua tree depended on the giant mammals to reach up high and eat their seeds, and thus disperse the Joshua tree. But now, stranded in time and space, the Joshua tree awaits a new fate, to be sacrificed in the name of progress.
Joshua trees are torn down to make way for solar projects. 23ABC's Cassie Carlisle travels to the Mojave Desert to talk to neighbors.
They're not your usual tree, more like something from fiction, but these
Where were the national news stories when they destroyed parts of the country to put up other fracking sites and other fossil fuels?
Not far from Ivanpah Solar, Daggett, California was home to several generations of solar arrays, including some of the first on the planet.
Alright, I'm gonna pause real quick and skip a little bit.
It was becoming clear that what we have been calling green, renewable energy and industrial civilization are one and the same. Desperate measures not to save the planet, but to save our way of life. Desperate measures, rather than face the reality, humans are experiencing the planet's limits all at once.
Every different perspective I look at and imagine, well, we could do more of this or go to a larger area or use more of that. Well, it turns out there isn't more. I looked at marine production and fish production and found that peaked 20 years ago. More and more of what we eat is from fish farming. The current acres of actively farmed land, that has peaked also. The rivers are already being irrigated to about the limits of what they can sustain. The Colorado River doesn't get to the ocean anymore. Well, then you start looking at groundwater, the southern Great Plains, and I think they can almost predict when they will run out of groundwater, and it's in a decade or two. A human vulnerability at the global scale, that any one of them we could maybe compartmentalize, but we're seeing them propagating across topic after topic of society and the Earth system. And I don't think the people in charge are near nervous enough.
No, because people in charge are the rich ones. The rich ones are going to be the last ones to suffer. And the poor people are the first ones to and then they'll have less people to work at those places. And I don't know what the rich people, all the rich people are old guys and they seem to think they're going to be dead before they have to worry about anything. They probably will. I mean, they're going to be the last ones to feel it at the top, so, you know, by the time it gets to them, half the population will be dead. So, it's, I mean, as you can tell, I have a pretty pessimistic outlook on the future.
That takes climate change seriously. Every expert I talked to wanted to bring my attention to the same underlying problem.
There are too many human beings using too much too fast.
Too lazy and not willing to give up some of their comforts.
Growth continues to be not the elephant, the herd of elephants in the room.
Can a single species that's come to dominate an entire planet
be smart enough to voluntarily limit its own presence?
They did it in China.
Wow. We have to have our abilities to consume reined in, because we're not good at reining them in if there are seemingly unrestrained resources.
Species hit the population wall a lot and then they crash. I mean, that's a common story in biology. If that happens to us, in a way, it's the natural order of things. And I don't think we're going to find a way out of this one. I don't.
As a scientist, what leads you to that conclusion?
Well, because right now, a large percentage of that number is supported by industrial agriculture, which is heavily subsidized by oil, and it's not sustainable. And, and there's no going back. Without seeing some sort of major die-off in population, there's no turning back.
What's the thing that nobody ever asked you that you wanted?
Nobody's ever asked me if I'm scared.
Yeah.
And I am. I actually am scared. I lose sleep over all of this.
So do I. I think one of the biggest problems we have is that they're connecting the power of profit and the power of big business to control everything to, whether or not we can become sustainable. And also, as long as most of the country is especially this country, is super lazy, doesn't want to have any big change happen, doesn't want to have to be told, you got to stop buying this or that, or you got to stop using so much water. And I mean, my family is a perfect example. I am the only one in my family who bothers to recycle all my plastic and all my cardboard and paper products. And the rest of my family just doesn't bother, doesn't care. My mom in particular, for some reason, I don't know why. I don't want to start another rant because a lot of you already know this stuff, but this is particularly about consumption and recycling. But my mom in particular used to always pretend like she was this peace, love, hippie, type of person all the time. She's always pretended to be like she's into the planet and she's into being like this hippie person and whatever. And she loves animals and whatever, but like she just decided, because she was too lazy to use gallons of water and just pour it into a reusable water bottle. She's been for a while now, at least like 3 or 4 years, just buying cases and cases and cases of water bottles. And I've begged her to stop doing that. Just stop buying cases of water bottles. It's really not that hard. I can give you free water from Grandma's house, and she lives in the country, and it's well water, and it's not polluted yet. And we can get free water and fill gallon jugs with it, and whatever. That's what I've been doing. But no, she wants bottles of water that she doesn't have to pour, that she doesn't have to wash, that she can just get out of the fridge and throw away, and she doesn't even bother to recycle them. And after I gave up begging her to not buy them, I started telling her, you need to save the bottles for me, because I am not going to settle for you just throwing these bottles away every time you use one because you don't want to recycle. Like, I'm willing to do the recycling, just put them in a different bag than the trash can. That's all I'm asking. And it's been like pulling teeth. So far, I've only gotten like maybe 1 case of bottles out of her. And she just refuses, like out of spite, because she knows how passionate I am about it, to save buying empty bottles for me. And I cannot stand people who are that selfish and lazy and destroying the planet just for the fuck of it. Like, that drives me crazy. And I am, so mad that out of my extended extended family, I'm the only one who cares about the planet. I mean, most of them are conservative, a lot of them are religious, some of them are supportive, but none of them give a fuck about the planet, okay? None of them want to listen up to me, tell them about what's going on with the planet and how we need to start doing things to stop it. You know, it's like, who cares about anybody who's under 40 years old who's suffering through this? You know, who cares? They don't care. They're going to be dead. Who cares? I mean, I've noticed, you know, since I was like 16 or whatever, that every year people become more and more and more and more selfish and apathetic and don't give a fuck about what happens to anybody else, as long as they're taken care of, as long as they have what they want and need, you know, as long as they're comfortable. Who cares about anybody else? And that includes family, because my family, for one, doesn't give a fuck about what other people are going through. Like, I've tried, you know, talking to them about immigrants who drown trying to get to this country because they think this is such a great country, and people who we're going to have this mass immigration to the countries that are the least affected once this gets worse, and they don't care. They don't care how many people die because of climate change. They don't care if millions of animals are going to die from the pollution. If thousands of species die out every year from the pollution and the change in weather and everything, and it just drives me crazy. Like, I feel like I'm in some kind of a fucked up, you know, a messed up, upside down world where there's no logic, there's no common sense, there's no planning ahead. Everybody's just, who cares about that? We're here right now, and as long as we're not dying right now, and as long as we have what we need right now, that's all that matters. I can't even get my family to help me plan 3 months ahead as far as keeping my utilities going. So, like, why do people think, you know, I mean, there's so few people who care about the planet and care about the future left. I don't think we can stand up against, you know, the massive amount of people who are just too lazy and not willing to do anything. So that's going to be the planet, is lazy and just passive and apathetic, because I don't know if it's just mainstream media or technology in general that has worn people down to be like that, but we're pretty much fucked. At least for the last 20 years, I've had a pessimistic outlook for humanity, and I've always seen the human race as this cancer or virus or whatever on the planet that is destroying for our own needs, and we don't care what happens to the planet. Like, we're just consuming it as fast as possible so we can be comfortable and have convenience, I guess. Like, I often wish I was born back in time that I could have experienced having clean air and water and food not full of processed chemicals. I know what it's like to be reasonably healthy, you know, not have, you know, this massive just wealth inequality and human rights inequality, and just, I often wish I knew what it was like, you know, back before I was so stressed out over this stuff, because I really have quite a pessimistic outlook about the future, and it's not getting any better. It's really not. There's nothing. I often people in the progressive movement, people like on TYT, talking about how positive they are about the future and how you know, optimistic they are about how we're gonna overcome this and whatever. And it's like, yeah, but you're in the upper class. I mean, you're making, you know, $200,000 a year or more, and you don't know what it's like to have to try and find clean water, and then try and recycle plastic, and try and talk your conservative family into acting like, you know, humanistic, I guess. I don't know how you call it. Like, acting like you give a fuck about other life besides people. But anyway, let's move on to part 3, because we're over half an hour now. I don't want to use my camera battery. So I'm going to stop it here and move on to the next part. and I'll start off at the next. So, catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.